Hi guys, we're going to start talking about Chapter 9, Lesson 1 today. After you watch this video, you'll need to go back into Canvas and complete the quiz. Follow the directions listed there to obtain your achievement unlocked for Lesson 1. We're going to start with a lot of different hardships that people go through during the Revolution. Once the Declaration had been signed, it wasn't all happy. People fell into different camps. People that wanted to fight for independence were called patriots. Those who wanted to stay loyal to British side were called the loyalists. And really, everyone fell into about one-third camp. So about a third wanted to fight for independence, the patriots. About a third were loyal. And about a third were neutral. They were kind of meh, and they didn't really take a side. This could really rip families apart, politics, who you believed, so it could rip communities apart, family apart. And one of the big sticking points was the Anglican Church. The Church of England was headed by the king. He was the Pope of the Anglican Church. He was equivalent to the Pope. And so people that wanted to fight for independence had to wrestle with, well, if I fight for independence, I can't be part of the church that maybe I have lived with my whole life and my religion. So this was a really difficult thing for people to choose to be a patriot, especially when their belief system was on the line. Other colonists had their towns robbed, their places of businesses destroyed by the British Army. And so in response, patriots took out their anger and robbed loyal citizens of Britain in response. And some patriots went as far as destroying their own stuff so that the British couldn't take it from them. If they couldn't have it, no one could have it. Along with personal hardships, the colonies were under economic issues. The British used their warships to blockade ports. Things weren't coming into the colonies. Goods that they had used for everyday life weren't coming in. So no new goods coming in. The goods that they have, short supply. And with a smaller supply, that means demand, and the demand stays the same. Prices rise. That's what's called inflation. Inflation means that you need more money to buy the same thing. So go to the grocery store, your loaf of bread's $1.50 today. If you go tomorrow, it's $2.25. You go the next day, it's $3. In 2 days, that same loaf of bread is now twice as much. That's inflation. And also what caused inflation was the falling value of colonial paper money. Paper money is all about trust and belief that it is worth a certain amount, that $1 buys this much stuff. Well, as confidence fell in that colonial paper money, it took more and more colonials to be able to buy the same things. Also, Congress was just printing money. So just because they were printing more didn't actually mean they had more money. It actually diluted, or it made each dollar, each continental, less than the one before it. So just printing money doesn't solve a solution. It doesn't mean that there's actually more money out there. It actually lowers the value of each denomination of money. And Congress also had difficulties paying for the war. The Articles of Confederation did not mandate that the states had to help pay for the war. So Congress had to go to the states and ask for money, and the states could say no, and there was no ramifications or consequences for saying no to Congress. With the shortage of goods, people also started taking advantage. It's a process called profiteering. Today we call it price gouging, where they charge extra high prices for crops or goods, even though the market doesn't demand that. A great example of this is after 9/11. There were many gas stations that started charging $5, $6 a gallon, even though there was nothing affected in the pipeline for amount of oil, the supply, or the demand side. It was people taking advantage of fear of what might happen in the future. That's called profiteering. States tried to put laws into place about how much people could charge for food. And it also, at the time, they also made it illegal to hoard, collect, or hide large amounts of food. But there was no real way to enforce it, so those laws were frequently broken. We also had very many women taking active roles in the war. Men went off to fight wars, and we see this throughout our history when we have a large population of our men go fight wars, women take over those roles that were typically men's roles. So they started taking over the family businesses and farms. Martha Washington, George Washington's wife, she traveled with him during the winter. Many women were on the battlefield. They cooked, they cleaned, while others brought water. Some other famous women. Sybil Ludington, she was a teenager. She rode 40 miles to tell Americans of a British attack. To put this in perspective, she rode twice as far as Paul Revere during his famous midnight ride. Deborah Sampson was the Revolutionary War's Mulan, as she dressed like a man so she could fight in the war. Margaret Corbin was wounded after taking her husband's place in battle, and she was recognized as the first woman veteran recognized by Congress. And a veteran is someone who has served in the military, so she got the military recognition that she deserved. African Americans, roughly about 20% of the population of the country was of African descent. Most of those African Americans were in the South, but there were a few communities, free African Americans, in the northern colonies. Close to 5,000 African Americans fought for the Continental Army, and many were promised freedom in exchange for their service. You had James Armiston, who was a slave from Virginia. He helped spy for Washington, and his information actually won a battle. And after the war, Armiston was given his freedom. The British also had slaves fighting for them, about 300, and they were also promised freedom for their service. They wore patches that said "Liberty for Slaves." And one other African American, Peter Salem, was one of 5 African Americans who fought both at the Battle of Concord and at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Native Americans, on the other hand, were really neutral to begin with. They didn't have a say, really. They didn't like either side particularly. But as the war dragged on, they needed to choose some sides. So in 1777, Mohawk agreed to help the British. His hope was it would keep people from moving west. We had that proclamation of 1763 where the king said no settlers west of the Appalachians, and so this was something that Mohawk was relying on. You had some others that decided to fight for Americans, like Oneida, and western settlers, white settlers who had already moved out there, really didn't support the Patriot cause. They didn't really care for independence, but they definitely didn't want the British on their lands. And that is lesson 1. So go back out to Canvas, complete your quiz, meet the requirements, and get your achievement badge.